Welcome everybody to my next installment on my YouTube channel. This video I'm going to do a tune-up on a 2011 Ford Explorer. I believe it has a what is it, a 3.5 liter V6. We just bought this. It had a slight misfire, but that was no problem. Tune-ups on these are not that hard. You just got to take a couple extra little precautionary steps and you're fine. So I got it warmed it up because it's a little cold out here today. So I've got it warm. I'm going to start by removing the engine cover. I'm going to remove the engine cover and the air intake hoses. Tab right there. This will take a little bit of finagling to get around that oil fill right there. The cover off. There's the intake. So yeah, it looks a little daunting, but hey, it's just nothing but nuts and bolts. So with the engine cover off, I want to take the intake hose off. In order to do that, you got to remove a couple little pieces off there. This is one of the vapor hoses. These are pretty easy to remove. See this little gray tab right there? You just want to use your fingers. You pull the gray tab like that and wiggle the hose, it pops right off. Loosen it up from the throttle body, loosen it up from the air cleaner. Get those warm screw clamps loose and pop off this little hose right here, and the intake hose will pop right off. There's a couple other small hoses you got to pop off before this will come off, before you pull the intake off. You've got your vapor canister vent valve right here, so we're going to disconnect the electrical connector by pushing that tab and pull it. Now we have a vapor hose right here. Pop it loose from the retaining tabs. Just be careful not to poke holes in it. Last thing you want is a vapor leak. That loose from those retaining tabs. And I'm going to pop it loose from the valve itself. I'll show you how to do this in just a second. It takes a little bit of finagling, but it's not that hard. it's loose. This, when it's on the engine, it looks like that. There's two tabs. You squeeze them together on the underside and you push it, and it pops right out like that. So that's out of the way. Disconnect the throttle body cabling. Since the intake's going to come off, you got to remove this hose out of that retainer. You have a wire harness retainer. Just going to gently pry that out. There we go. It's free. Got that. All right. There's a few squeeze clamps. There's a couple squeeze clamps that you got to remove some hoses before the intake will come off. Loose, give it a little twist, just enough to break it free. You don't want to twist too far. Twist too far, you may damage yourself. So once it's loose, get the screwdriver in there between the hose and the plastic. There we go. Off to the side. Alright. There's another hose in the back that I'm going to pop loose too. The same thing with that. Typically there's going to be a brace behind the throttle body, so I'm going to pull the throttle body off from the intake first to look behind there. Just 8mm screws, bolts. Do it by hand without gloves. Word of caution, everybody. You don't work on cars all that often. I'd recommend using hand tools. Power tools can get away from you. if you're not used to the power tool, you could break something. Seen it many times before. Somebody gets a little anxious with the power tools. They get in there, pop before you know it. They either break a bolt or the retainer that the bolt screws into. Sometimes they even break the plastic or surrounding material. So we got all 4 8mm bolts loose and out. Pops right off. And sure enough, there is a brace back there. No biggie, it's an 8mm as well. Put my tool on there and I'll bring the camera around to show you. See back there, it's kind of hard to see. But back there's a little 8mm bolt. And there's a brace down there. So I'm just going to pop that loose. Get the bolt out of there. This is going to be one of those instances where I say, do what I say, don't do what I do. So with that in mind, do not put your tools and or bolts on the cowl above the intake, lest you accidentally knock them and they fall into the engine, which can be rather disastrous. So now I'm going to pop the intake bolts loose. They're going to stay in there, which is good. That way you don't accidentally drop them down in there. We're going to pop those loose. More. Make sure they're pretty loose. Okay. Loose. All right. Small tug. There we go. She's been on there a while, so it's a little sticky. But now she's ready to pop off. Voila. Intake manifold removed. In order that you don't drop nuts and bolts down in the intake, I like to clean it off and put tape over it. check my inventory, I'm out of carburetor cleaner. So next best thing, a little bit of hand sanitizer. It takes off all the oil residue. Sure, we all have plenty of this stuff laying around. Put a little bit on a rag, rub it around, coat that rag. Just going to gently wipe, get off all the oil. Once the oil is pretty much removed, I'll do it one more time just to make sure. A couple more squirts. Nothing fancy, just a little bit of masking tape. Who knows, just in case, nut, bolt, or even a tool could potentially fall down in there. Alright, now it's time to do the actual tune-up. So, these coils, little red locking tab. You just got to give them a little bit of a twist, they pop right up. Once you pop them up, you squeeze that tab right there. Push that tab, this is the little locker. Pop goes loose. Pop them loose. Put those off to the side. Alright, this right here is going to be bank 2, which houses cylinder 4, 5, and 6. Backside 1, 2, 3. Future reference, just in case you get misfire codes, which is what we got. And I'll go into that in a few minutes also. Get those out. These can be a little bit of a pain. Luckily, popped out nicely. Coil boot looks okay. That looks okay. And that looks okay. So we're going to do these one at a time. a little worn. 100,000 miles. They're ready. Double check. Yep, they're the same. Yep, same plug. Much better looking electrodes. Get better fuel mileage and avoid any misfires. So before I put these in, give the threads just a light coating of some of this anti-seize. Not a whole lot, just a small dab. A little dab will do you, you know. Always do this by hand. Last thing you want to do is cross thread spark plugs in the cylinder head. So do it by hand. Yeah, good. Get these old plugs out of here. These are the spark plugs I'm using, Motorcrafts. Recommended by the manufacturer. Firm believer in that. These plugs were designed specifically for this engine. Not too tight, just tight enough. You want to snug it up. Too tight and you start, you could potentially strip it out. So before I pull it out, I just give it a little wiggle, going in the opposite direction. Voila. Pulls right out. This side is pretty easy to get to. I could have done this side without pulling the intake off, but there's a reason behind that, and I'll get into that in just a few minutes. Old plug out. You can see there's a little bit of a rust ring around the porcelain. Sometimes that'll cause a misfire. There's normal condensation. Remember, just a little dab will do you. Be very careful. You always want to use a spark plug socket. They're designed to protect the porcelain. There's nothing worse than putting it back together. You do all this work and you accidentally crack a piece of porcelain. You gotta pull it all back apart. If you don't have a scan tool, you gotta figure out which cylinder it is. That can't be fun. Snug it, good enough. We're keeping track of these coils. And I'll tell you why in just a minute after I'm done with this one. This is one of those times that you definitely do not want to be using any power tools. And I'm inspecting these I typically like to inspect the electrode, make sure there's nothing cracked or broken inside there around that porcelain. I run my nail across the porcelain too, like that, just to see if I can feel any cracks. Believe it or not, every once in a while you'll get these out of the box. They may have a small crack in it. That's rather disappointing too. Run it in there by hand. Down. When doing spark plugs, you want to be as straight on there as possible. Even though this plug socket is designed to protect it with a piece of rubber inside, don't know if you can see that, there's still the possibility that if you get too much of an angle, you put extra torque on that, it has the potential to crack the porcelain as well. So you always want to be careful with that. Alright, now to the back side. Now, earlier I talked about misfire codes, and this vehicle was having problems with a misfire. I took it out, drove it, and she started missing a little bit of hesitation. I got it back, checked the codes, and I had misfires on a couple cylinders on the back side. So, being 100,000 miles plus, I know it needed a tune-up. Coils can be a little expensive, so I'm not going to throw coils at it for misfire willy-nilly. So what I've done was, since I know this side did not have a misfire, I know these coils are good. So what I'm doing is taking the coils on the back side, coming straight to the front, putting them up here. I'm going to go up here with all these. They look good. So hopefully the coils are okay, but this makes it easier in case I still have a misfire, but if the codes go to this side of the engine, then I definitely know I've got a bad coil. Since I know these coils are good, I'm putting them in the back. And if these coils are bad, you saw how easy it is to change them out. So I can do that easily. So before I tighten these down, I'm going to get a little bit of dielectric grease right here, just a little dab, just a small dab inside. Put them in each one of these. Any dielectric grease will do, but I use good old Motorcraft. Just a little dab. Not a whole lot. Put those in there. See? If you're not careful, tools will fall inside your engine. If that was a smaller tool, it could have fallen right into that intake. So, there you go. Alright, so would have worn. Once again, it's time. You definitely want to do these one at a time. Because you want to minimize the amount of time that the cylinder is open. And it'll prevent possible contamination. You don't want a piece of sand or something to blow in there. So. Snug it. So we're almost done on this back side. Almost done. Almost done. The reason why I use anti-seize on these is because, well, of course, obvious reason, you don't want that anything to seize up inside. But also when you've got two metals that are not similar in makeup, such as an aluminum head with a steel spark plug, there's a remote possibility that in time the metals can interact with each other and can seize up on each other. So I just want to make sure that next time I do the tune-up, it'll go flawlessly. All right. A little dab. So I'm not going to bore you with the reassembly, except I do want to show you one more thing before I finish putting the intake back on. Reassembly is essentially the same, just reversing the procedure. You just want to be very careful. Make sure you don't knock anything inside, and to test fit all your nuts and bolts. When you put the intake on, set it down, turn each intake screw in a couple threads, make sure everything's all centered up, go back there, you do your support bracket, finger tight that, put it in there a couple threads, wiggle it around, make sure everything fits okay, and then bolt down your intake. When you bolt it down, you're going to want to start from the inside and work your way out when you tighten them down. There's a torque spec. Don't know what it is, but you can look that up on the internet. I just torque it down by hand, make sure it's good and tight. Work your way out, tighten them down. The only other thing I wanted to show everybody is that when you pull the intake off, it's a good idea to replace the intake gasket too. I'll show you what that looks like. Here's the intake. Over. And that's the gasket right there. So, made out of rubber. In time, the rubber becomes hard, and it can eventually collapse on itself. So, only a couple extra bucks. Get yourself an intake gasket. Pop the old one off. See how very pliable. Very pliable the new one is. You can just put it in there, work it around. Tap it in there. Looks good. And then I'm going to go back on there with that. Once again, I'm not going to bore you with that part of the detail. I showed you how to pull it off. The reverse procedure is just as easy. Some intake kits will come with a new throttle body gasket right there. This one didn't. Don't know why. I guess maybe that's the difference between the high-end intake kits and the economy versions, but it's all good. It'll seal. So as you can see, it's not much to it. Just always be careful putting it back together, and take that tape off before you put that intake on. I don't know how many people have put it on with the tape on there. So have at it. Just to give you a rundown, the tools I used on this video. Very simple. I used a pick tool, flathead screwdriver, a pair of slip joint pliers, 1/4 inch ratchet, 2 1/4 inch extensions, an 8mm swivel, spark plug socket, had a couple of 3/8 extensions, 3/8 ratchet. On top of the spark plugs, I used a little bit of high temperature nickel anti-seize lubricant and a little bit of dielectric compound, also brake caliper grease. So that's all there is to it. With time, it probably would take maybe, if you're taking your time, I'd imagine, you know, hour and a half maybe, start to finish. But your degree of experience will have an effect on how long it takes. So with that in mind, she's all done.